Before we get into tonight's stories, I just want to say thanks for being here. If you enjoy this kind of content and want to see more of it, consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. It really does help more than you'd think, especially when you're trying to get stories like these in front of the right audience. And if you've already subscribed, I genuinely appreciate it. Your support is what keeps this channel growing and lets me keep putting these videos together. Thank you. I'm in my mid-40s now, and this happened long enough ago that the woods where it took place don't look quite the same anymore. Some of the trails are wider, there are posted signs where there used to be none, and a few areas that were once just unofficial footpaths are now blocked off completely. People assume that's because of development or liability issues. I don't correct them. Back then, I was living alone in a small rented house in a rural town. The tree line started where my yard ended. I worked a rotating schedule at a company, long hours followed by stretches of time off. When I wasn't working, I spent a lot of time outside, walking, checking deer trails, sometimes hunting small game in season. The woods were just part of daily life. They weren't a destination or a challenge. They were there, the same way the road or the river was there. I grew up around firearms, so owning one never felt remarkable. I carried a handgun when I walked deep enough into the trees, not because I expected trouble, but because that was the habit everyone around me had. Coyotes, the occasional aggressive animal, those were real concerns. People disappearing or running into something unnatural wasn't. If you'd asked me at the time whether I believed in anything like that, I would have laughed it off and changed the subject. The particular day this happened was unremarkable in every way that mattered. Late afternoon, fall. I hadn't planned a long walk. I just wanted to clear my head after a night shift and stretch my legs. I parked near one of the old logging roads and followed it until it narrowed into a trail I'd used dozens of times before. I knew that stretch of woods well enough to move through it without thinking. Where the ground dipped, where it stayed dry after rain, which trees had been marked years ago and never cut. There were no houses nearby, no camps that I knew of, and no reason for anyone else to be out there on a weekday afternoon. That wasn't unusual. Most of the time, I didn't see another person. I'd been walking like 30 minutes. I heard crying. Wind through leaves can sound like a lot of things if you're not paying attention, but this, a woman's voice, crying in that uneven, breathless way that sounds like someone trying not to make noise and failing. I stopped and listened. The sound came from deeper in the woods, off the trail to my left. My first thought wasn't fear. It was irritation mixed with concern. People get lost out there sometimes, or they wander off trails without realizing how disorienting it can get. I'd helped someone find their way back once before, a teenager who'd gone looking for a swimming hole and panicked when he couldn't find the road. I called out, asking if someone needed help. My voice sounded flat to my own ears, like I was talking in a warehouse. The crying stopped. That caught my attention more than the sound itself. When people are genuinely distressed, they don't usually stop immediately just because they hear another voice. They respond, even if it's just to shout back or cry louder. The silence felt deliberate, like someone had chosen it. I waited a few seconds, then called out again. I stepped off the trail and moved in the direction the sound had come from. I wasn't rushing, and I wasn't trying to be quiet. I wasn't expecting a threat. I had my hand near my jacket pocket where the gun was, but that was muscle memory more than anything else. As I got closer, the woods didn't change in any obvious way. No sudden clearing, no unusual smells, no sense of crossing into a different space. If anything, it felt more ordinary than before. Same trees, same uneven ground, the same scattered dead leaves. I heard the crying again, closer now, softer but more strained. It sounded like it was coming from just ahead of me. I pushed through a patch of low brush and stopped short. There was a woman standing near a tree about 20 feet away. She was facing away from me, slightly hunched, her hands hanging at her sides. From behind, there was nothing immediately wrong with her. Long dark hair, light-colored clothing that didn't quite fit the season. Too thin for the weather, but not alarmingly so. She could have been in her 30s, maybe older. It was hard to tell. I spoke to her, told her I was there to help. My voice sounded steadier than I felt, but that wasn't fear yet. More confusion. Why she hadn't responded earlier. Why she was standing so still now. She didn't turn around. The crying stopped again, abruptly, like a switch being flipped. I took a step closer and repeated myself. Asked if she was hurt, if she needed help getting back to the road. That's when she moved. She didn't turn toward me. She stepped toward the tree in front of her and placed her hands against the bark. I thought she might be steadying herself, like she was dizzy or about to collapse. Then she started to climb. I've seen people climb trees, kids, hunters, even a few adults who thought it was a good idea after drinking. This wasn't that. Her movements didn't follow the logic of balance or leverage. Her arms bent at angles that didn't make sense, elbows flaring outward as her hands found holds that shouldn't have supported her weight. Her legs folded and unfolded in a way that reminded me of someone moving underwater, slow but wrong. She didn't scramble or strain. She just went up. I don't remember drawing my gun, but I remember it being in my hand. I remember my chest tightening, my breath coming in short, shallow pulls that didn't feel like they were doing anything. For a few seconds, I genuinely thought I might pass out, not from fear, but from the sudden realization that I didn't understand what I was seeing and that my body had decided it didn't matter. She climbed higher and then stopped, perched against the trunk several feet off the ground. Her limbs were wrapped around the tree in a way that looked more like clinging than sitting, but there was no tension in her body. She wasn't gripping, she was resting. I told her to stop. I don't remember the exact words, probably something useless, like asking her what she was doing. She stayed where she was. Slowly, deliberately, she turned her head. I could see her face then. Her skin looked pale, but not in the way people usually mean when they say that. Not sickly, not drained. It was flat, almost uniform, like color had been removed rather than lost. Her eyes were open wide, but they didn't focus on me. They weren't tracking anything at all. I can't describe her expression beyond that. There was no obvious emotion there. No anger, no fear, no awareness I could recognize. Just a face turned in my direction, attached to a body that didn't seem to be operating by the same rules as mine. My lungs burned. I tried to speak and couldn't. I remember making a sound that might have been my name, or nothing meaningful at all. She didn't move. I took a step back and nearly fell. My legs felt unreliable, like they belonged to someone else. I shouted for help then, even though I knew there was no one within earshot. It wasn't a plan. It was a reflex. I forced myself upright and backed away, never taking my eyes off her. She stayed in that same position, head turned, body pressed against the tree, watching, if that's the right word. When I turned and ran, I didn't feel brave or decisive. I felt clumsy and slow, like I was moving through resistance. Branches caught at my clothes. The ground seemed to tilt under my feet. I didn't look back because I couldn't bear the idea of seeing her somewhere she shouldn't be. I didn't stop until I hit the trail, and even then I kept moving until I reached my truck. I locked the doors and was trying to get my breathing under control. I didn't call the police. People ask me about that when I tell this story. Why didn't you report it? Why didn't you go back with someone else? The answer is simple and unsatisfying. I didn't know what I would say. A woman crying in the woods who climbed a tree in a way I didn't like. There was no sign of a crime, no missing person report that I was aware of, no evidence beyond my own account. I also knew, instinctively, that going back wouldn't make anything clearer. It would just put me in the same place again. I avoided that area after that, took different trails, found other places to walk. Life went on, because that's what it does. I changed jobs a few years later, moved closer to town, started a family. The woods stayed where they were, and I stayed away from that part of them. I've thought about that woman a lot over the years. I've tried to come up with explanations that fit inside the world I understood then and mostly still do. A person in crisis? None of those explanations account for the way she moved, or the way she stayed there, or the look on her face. They don't account for the certainty I felt in that moment that whatever I was witnessing wasn't meant for me, and that my presence had interrupted something I wasn't supposed to see. I don't tell this story to make a point or to warn anyone. I don't have advice. I I still go into the woods, though I'm more careful about where and when. I still carry a gun, though I know now that it wouldn't have mattered. What happened that day didn't change my beliefs in any dramatic way. It didn't turn me into someone who sees threats everywhere or talks about things beyond understanding. It just left a gap in my sense of how the world works. A quiet one, most of the time, easy to ignore. And I remind myself that not everything that exists makes room for us to understand it or even to witness it safely. When I was growing up, I lived with my parents and my older sister in a 2-story house on the edge of a suburban neighborhood. I was in my late teens at the time, still in high school, still very much living under my parents' roof and rules. Upstairs were the bedrooms, downstairs was the living room, kitchen, and a small den that never really got used for anything other than storage. My parents worked long hours, and my sister was in college by then, so there were stretches of time when I had the place to myself. That wasn't unusual, and it wasn't something I thought much about. Most days followed the same routine. School in the morning, home in the afternoon, homework at the kitchen table or in my room. My parents were strict in a quiet way. They didn't yell much, but they didn't need to. Certain things just weren't allowed. Drinking, smoking, drugs, especially drugs. My sister had gotten caught smoking when she was younger, and after that, the house rules were made very clear. By the time this happened, I had started experimenting a little, mostly out of boredom. A small amount of marijuana that I kept hidden in my room, tucked away where I knew my parents wouldn't look. I wasn't reckless about it. I didn't smoke inside the house. I didn't tell friends. It was something I did occasionally when I knew for sure I was alone. The day this happened, it was a weekday sometime in the afternoon. My parents were both at work, and my sister wasn't supposed to be home until late that night. I remember pulling into the driveway and noticing how weird the house felt, the way it always did when no one else was there. I went inside, dropped my backpack by the stairs, and checked my phone. No missed calls, no texts. I walked through the house the way I always did, almost on autopilot. I grabbed a drink from the fridge, stood in the kitchen for a minute, then sat on the couch and flipped through channels without really watching anything. After a while, the idea crossed my mind that I had the house to myself. No rush, no one coming home soon. I remember feeling relaxed about it. I decided I'd go upstairs and grab what I'd hidden in my room. I wasn't planning to smoke right then, just wanted it nearby. The stairs creaked the way they always had. That sound had been there my entire life, and it never bothered me. I went up slowly, holding my drink, thinking about nothing in particular. When I reached the top of the stairs, the hallway was empty. My parents' bedroom door was closed. My sister's room was across from mine, also closed. Mine was at the end of the hall. As I walked toward my room, I noticed a smell. I didn't register it as anything important. It wasn't smoke, it wasn't food. It was sharp, almost metallic, and it didn't belong to anything I could immediately place. I remember slowing down, trying to figure out where it was coming from. Cleaning products. Something spilled. I hadn't been upstairs yet that day, so I didn't know how long it had been there. When I opened my bedroom door, the smell was stronger, unmistakable now. It filled the room in a way that felt wrong. My room was exactly how I'd left it that morning. Bed unmade, desk cluttered, nothing looked disturbed. The window was closed, the fan was off. I stood there, still holding my drink, trying to make sense of it. I didn't panic. I didn't think someone had broken in. That idea didn't even occur to me at first. I assumed there was a logical explanation I just hadn't figured out yet. I stepped inside. The smell seemed concentrated closer to the center of the room, near my bed. I was thinking I should open a window, but before I did, I bent down to reach under the loose floorboard where I kept my stuff hidden. I had done it so many times before that I didn't even think about it. That's the last thing I remember clearly. The next memory I have isn't continuous. It's fragmented, disconnected, like waking up from a dream already halfway through. I was on the floor, but it didn't feel like my bedroom floor. Everything felt heavy. My head felt thick, like it was stuffed with cotton. I couldn't move properly. I remember trying to breathe and feeling like the air wasn't going where it was supposed to. There was pressure around my mouth and nose. Above me, something moved. At the time, I didn't understand what I was seeing. My vision was blurred, like I was looking through water. I could make out the shape of legs, feet passing across my field of view. Someone walking, slowly, moving across the room, above where I was lying. I couldn't hear anything clearly, just a dull, distant rushing sound, like blood in your ears. When I came to again, I wasn't in my house. I was on my back, strapped to something hard. There were bright lights overhead, too bright to look at directly. My mouth tasted wrong, bitter, chemical. My throat burned slightly, like I'd swallowed something I wasn't supposed to. Someone was talking, but I couldn't focus on the words. I tried to move my arms and realized they were restrained. Panic started to creep in then, but it was distant, dulled by exhaustion and confusion. It took a few seconds before I recognized the sound of the siren. An ambulance. I turned my head slightly and saw my sister sitting near the back doors, her face pale and streaked with tears. When she noticed my eyes were open, she leaned forward and said my name over and over, her voice breaking each time. I tried to ask what happened, but my mouth wouldn't cooperate. Everything felt slow, heavy. Later, much later, after the hospital, after the tests and questions and explanations, she told me what she found. She had come home earlier than expected that day. A class had been canceled. She said when she walked into the house, the first thing she noticed was the smell. Stronger downstairs than upstairs, but still faint enough that she almost ignored it. She thought maybe my parents had cleaned something before leaving. When she went up to her room and passed mine, she noticed my door was open. That wasn't unusual, but when she looked inside, she saw me on the floor. I wasn't moving. She said I was lying on my side near the bed, one arm tucked under me, the other stretched out awkwardly. My eyes were closed, my lips were slightly parted. She called my name, thinking I'd fallen asleep or passed out. I didn't respond. She shook me, harder and harder. Nothing. That's when she called 911. The paramedics told her later that there was a chemical smell on my breath. Not anything they could identify immediately. Something industrial. They found a faint residue around my mouth and nose, like something had been held there briefly. The police came to the house while I was in the hospital. They searched my room. They searched the rest of the house. Nothing was missing. No doors or windows were forced open. No signs of a struggle. No containers, no rags, nothing obvious that would explain what I'd been exposed to. When they asked me what I remembered, I told them everything I could. The smell, the room, the movement above me. I made it clear I hadn't taken anything. I hadn't been drinking. I hadn't smoked yet. The marijuana was still hidden where I'd left it. They tested me for everything they could think of. The results didn't point to anything definitive. Whatever it was had either metabolized quickly or hadn't been something they routinely screened for. Officers suggested I might have passed out on my own. Low blood pressure, anxiety, something medical. It was said carefully, like he didn't fully believe it himself. My parents didn't know what to think. They were relieved I was alive, shaken by how close it had been, and angry in a quiet way that something like that could happen in their house without explanation. My sister blamed herself for not coming home sooner. I told her not to, but it didn't change how she felt. I recovered physically within a few days. No lasting damage, according to the doctors. But the house felt different to me after that. I didn't go into my room alone for a long time. When I did, I kept the door open. The smell never came back. I know what I saw. Someone was in that room with me. Not to hurt me in a way that left marks, just long enough to make sure I wouldn't remember them. Years later, I don't have an explanation that fully makes sense. The case went nowhere. My parents sold the house not long after I moved out, for reasons unrelated, they said. I've never been comfortable being alone in enclosed spaces since then. Elevators, small rooms, anywhere I can't see the exits. It's not fear, like a constant awareness of how quickly things can happen without warning. Nothing like that has ever happened to me again. I'm Lauren. I was in my early 20s when we went back to that house. At the time, I was living on my own in the city, working an office job that didn't mean much to me beyond paying rent. My parents were settled a few hours away, and the rest of the family was spread out, most of us only seeing one another on holidays or funerals. The house itself sat in a rural stretch of the state, far enough from town that nights felt longer there. Winters were always the hardest. Snow piled up fast, the roads stayed icy, and once the sun went down, there wasn't much to do except stay inside. That house had been in our family longer than anyone could clearly account for. It belonged to my grandparents, though even calling it theirs felt inaccurate. It was more like they were caretakers for something that existed before them and would outlast them. It was a large, square structure with an enclosed porch that rattled in the wind and a steep roof that shed snow in loud, sudden slides. The interior smelled like old wood, and every room had its purpose, and every purpose had rules attached to it, spoken and unspoken. My grandparents were deeply religious, but not in a way that fit neatly into any single denomination. Faith in that house was a system of habits. You prayed before meals, before sleep, before travel. You washed your hands a certain way. You said certain words aloud when someone was sick, even if it was only a cold. Illness was treated less like a medical problem and more like a moral imbalance. If you followed the rules closely enough, health would return. That was the belief, at least. By the time I came along, most of the stricter practices had softened. My parents didn't follow them the same way, and neither did my aunts and uncles. But the stories remained, passed around in careful fragments when the older generation wasn't listening. One of those stories involved a child who passed away decades earlier, back when my grandparents were younger and more certain about their methods. The way it was told to me, the child came down with pneumonia during a particularly harsh winter. Roads were blocked, and the nearest hospital was over an hour away, even in good conditions. Rather than attempt the drive, my grandparents insisted on keeping him home. They performed their rituals, heated compresses, prayers spoken in low voices, certain substances rubbed into the chest. They believed deeply that outside intervention would interfere with the cleansing process. The child passed away in the upstairs bedroom after several days. By the time a doctor was called, it was already too late. No charges were filed. No one went to jail. The explanation given was that winter illnesses were unpredictable back then. Still, the story lingered. It wasn't told with guilt so much as with a kind of rigid sadness, the sort that comes from believing you did the right thing and living with the outcome anyway. I grew up hearing about that room without ever being taken into it. It was kept closed most of the year, used only for storage. When I asked why, my grandmother would say it was drafty or that the floorboards needed work. There was always a practical reason ready. Years later, when my father was injured at work, a fall that left him with a broken leg and limited mobility for months, it made sense for us to stay at my grandparents' house. They had space, and my mother needed help caring for him. I took time off work and went with them, expecting boredom more than anything else. The house hadn't changed much. Furniture had been rearranged, and some rooms felt emptier after relatives moved away or passed on. But the bones were the same heavy doors, the same narrow staircase. My room was upstairs, across from the one that had stayed closed all those years. That door was open now, cleared out and freshly made up for guests. No one mentioned its history when they handed me the blankets. Days were filled with routine, helping my father move around, cooking large meals, running errands into town when the weather allowed. Evenings were spent together in the living room, talking. The house settled into its usual nighttime sounds, wood contracting in the cold, wind pushing against the windows. Nothing felt out of place. The first night something unsettled me. I had stayed up later than usual reading. The rest of the house had gone quiet. Lights were off downstairs, and I could hear my parents' muffled voices through the floor as they talked in their bedroom. When I finally turned my lamp off, the darkness felt heavier than I expected, thick enough that it pressed in around me. Sometime later, I became aware of movement outside my door, just the sense that someone was there. The floorboards in that hallway were old and uneven. They made noise even under the lightest weight. I waited, listening, but nothing followed. Eventually, I opened the door and looked out. The hallway was empty. The other bedroom door stood open, its interior dark. I told myself it was nothing. Old houses made you imagine things. I went back to bed. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I lay awake, staring into the dark, feeling oddly alert. At some point, I became conscious of the mattress shifting slightly, as though someone had sat down near my feet. I didn't move. My mind ran through explanations, my own shifting weight, the frame settling, but none of them felt right. The sensation stayed, not heavy enough to indent the mattress deeply, but present. I kept my eyes closed and focused on my breathing. Whatever it was didn't touch me. It didn't speak. It simply existed there, close enough that I was aware of it until morning light crept through the window and the feeling faded. I didn't tell anyone. It seemed ridiculous once the sun was up. The days that followed were normal again. If anything, I felt embarrassed for having let my imagination run away from me. A few nights later, I returned to my room after dinner to grab a sweater. As soon as I stepped inside, I heard a voice say, "Hello." It sounded like someone standing a few feet away, speaking clearly. I froze, scanning the room. No one was there. The door was still open behind me, and I could hear my family talking downstairs. The voice hadn't come from the hallway. It came from inside the room. I backed out without responding and went downstairs. My parents were in the kitchen, my grandparents in the living room. Everyone accounted for. When I asked if anyone had come upstairs, they all said no. My grandmother frowned slightly, as if annoyed by the question, then told me I must have misheard something. I tried to accept that explanation, but I started avoiding my room unless I had to be there. I changed clothes quickly, slept with the light on, kept the door open whenever possible. The incident that ended my stay happened a few days later. I went upstairs alone in the late afternoon to pack some of my things, planning to move into the guest room downstairs. As I stepped inside, a familiar heaviness settled over me. I turned to leave and my body stopped responding. Without any decision on my part, I sat down on the edge of the bed. My head tilted back until I was staring at the ceiling. My muscles felt locked, not tense but unreachable, like commands sent to a disconnected system. I tried to shout, to call for help, but no sound came out. Panic surged, sharp and sudden, but it had nowhere to go. I don't know how long it lasted. A minute, maybe two. My vision narrowed, focusing on a crack in the ceiling plaster. Then sensation returned all at once. I bolted up and ran, nearly falling down the stairs in my rush. When I reached the living room, I was shaking so badly. My family listened as I tried to explain. My parents were concerned, my grandfather skeptical. My grandmother said nothing, her face unreadable. No one had an answer. They suggested stress, exhaustion, maybe a panic attack. No one mentioned the past. We left the next morning. I didn't go back to that house again. I only know that whatever remained in that room was tied to the things done there, and that some places hold on to more than just memories.